Hello everybody, my name is DekuGames and welcome to a video called Why 40k Triggers People by Pilgrim's Pass. I saw this video and I was like, this is going to be an absolute banger. No, it's not. The only thing that I think 40k recently triggers is a bunch of grifters and people who actually don't read the lore, while other people actually enjoy it and continue, while people go and whine about identity politics and all sorts of other shit. Because, oh, well, there's a female custodies, or there's a woman in power in Space Marine 2. Despite the fact that insert all named gay characters since the 1980s, and also all the other canon queer people and other things like that. I wanted to react to this video because I skipped ahead through this, and at one point this guy says the Slaanesh is clearly supposed to be an analog for transgender identity, and how because of the fact that they are androgynous, blue-haired, and are also hermaphrodites, that must mean that 40k is purposefully demonizing non-binary people. And I was like, this is going to be a banger. I have to watch this. I have got to react to this. So here we are. For those of you who don't know, I love 40k. I read a lot of the books. I do not have miniatures yet, if that counts as being a real fan or not. If you want to support me in making and getting miniatures, I have a Patreon down below, and a CashApp, and there's memberships going to be up soon, and there's tips. Anyway, so yeah, there's a lot. I'm a big 40k fan. I have a lot of the games on Steam. I play a lot of the games like Space Marine 2. I've been playing on the channel. Obviously, there's going to be a link to that on my main channel. Then there's also, I've read the Eisenhorn books, or I am reading the Eisenhorn books. I'm reading the very early books, too, just to see how the writing has evolved. And I watch a lot of lore videos, too. So, you can't call me a fake fan. I know my shit. Now, it's not as encyclopedic as some people, but I am still learning, and I still love it to death. Anyway, let's get into this. Also, be prepared. I'm going to be pausing a lot throughout this, but I'd imagine that that's going to be taking a lot of stress off of some of the people here.
The Warhammer 40k universe is inherently anti-progressive. Now, I'd like to clarify that this isn't meant to be a simple culture war video where I complain about what's happening with the beloved franchise.
So it's a complicated culture war video. Okay. Yes, Warhammer is anti-progressive. That's its theme. That's its message. It talks about how bad anti-progression is. That's why at the start of every single major 40th, 41st, and 42nd millennium book, it starts with saying this is a technological dark age filled with superstition and rhetoric. And then goes to show you that it's filled with war and only war, and that's not a good thing for the people within the lore. It's cool for us because we get to see big fucking 9-foot tall space marines shooting bolter rounds at Xenos. I guess to some people, it's based to be like the fucking Black Templars. It's based to read the Codex Astartes and follow it verbatim, right? It's based to like the Tau that are actually just fucking planetary libertarians, right? And also basically the Indian caste system filled with eugenics. Like, yeah, definitely based. Like, the only good people in 40k are the orcs because they're having the time of their fucking life.
Although it kind of is, since 40k is the current prize for one of the more recent battles all over social media. So touching a bit on that aspect is inevitable.
Yes, it is only the prize because a bunch of grifters keep saying that it's filled with DEI garbage, despite the fact that DEI only stands for diversity, inclusion, or equality and inclusion, as if that's a fucking bad thing. And if it is a bad thing, then why don't you just call it something else? But oh wait, people actually only care about it because they don't like black people or people of color or women or anything like that in their video games. Go look at literally any trending video of people complaining about DEI and saying, and watch how they say that they won't rape a woman because she's luckily ugly and she should be grateful for that. That I just saw. So, yeah. Just saying.
But my purpose with this video is to go beyond pop politics. I'll attempt to analyze a theory of history and perhaps
Is that Battle
political
Sector?
philosophy within the world-building context of the 40K galaxy as it is presented. And in so doing, I hope to generate a conversation about the idea of progress. You see, progress, both social and technological, is naturally inhibited by the very nature of the Warhammer universe. The 40K setting operates more on cycles, where humanity rises to fall, then rises again, and falls again. Like in this quote. The technological marvels upon which its dominion of the galaxy is founded are long gone. No man now knows how many times humanity has soared to lofty heights of achievement only to plummet once more to the depths of barbarity. The science that caused both advancement and debasement is now the subject of superstition and fear.
That's more because of the fact that the 40K universe is more built on a cycle of evil. That's the point. Because the Chaos Gods, the Immaterium, the Warp, and so on infects so many things because of the inherent flaws within humanity and the quote-unquote sins or whatever, that cycle continues. And that cycle is continuing even now, and now it is stagnating to the point where the Imperium is just filled with zealots. It is just filled with rhetoric. That's it. There has not been another cycle since the Horus Heresy started. And that was like the longest period. I guess, well, maybe the Age of Strife was. But like, yeah, it is built on cycles, but it's built on cycles of evil. Of something bad always happening because something is allowed, chaos is allowed to prosper. And now some people might take this as being as like a literal translation of being like, oh, whatever the Chaos Gods represent, that must mean that those things are bad. No, things like Slaanesh is excess is bad. Or things like Khorne is excess violence. And manslaughter and murder is bad. Rampant war, surprisingly, who would have guessed, is bad. Tzeentch, the idea that like when you don't change for a reason but only do something to upset balance is a bad thing, because that's Tzeentch's whole thing. It is not change for good or for bad. It is just change for change's sake. He likes the chaos of change, of riddles and mystery and all this other shit. That's why whenever you go into his mazes, it is not lined with walls of, we need to progress, we need good progress, we need racial equality. It's, haha, fucker, you're lost. How about this for change? Walk around corner. Guess what, bitch? There's more shit to walk down. Like, that's the whole idea behind Tzeentch. Not the idea that change is inherently bad. It's chaotic change in the way with no purpose. Slaanesh is bad because excess, greed, abhorrent lust, and so on and so forth. Because it is not just the idea of sexuality. It's not the idea of just things like excess and so on. It is the excess of everything pleasurable. Excess of art to a degree to where it is no longer just art. It is literally trying to push the boundaries of something so far that it is corrupted from what art actually was. This is not modern art. This is not the idea of, oh, well, if you make naked people. No, it's literally, okay, how can we call something art but make it as disgusting as possible? Oh, I know. How about the High Lords of Terra praising fucking servitor corpses as being a form of abominations, but also fucking like machines and art, right? That is the kind of art this Slaanesh is into. Slaanesh isn't into just orgies or whatever. They're into orgies where people fucking die. That's what they're into. And that is the kind of pleasure that they seek. And that is represented through humanity's pleasure worlds, where often people aren't actually doing things consensually with high nobles and so on and so forth. A lot of times, Slaanesh's sex is not consensual sex. No matter how much it is, that does not matter. The amount does not matter. A fucking gooner, it does not count in the eyes of Slaanesh. It is the rapist. It is the pedophile. It is the person going so far into depravity to rip somebody's bodily autonomy away to result in pleasure. That is Slaanesh, not fucking BDSM people or whatever. Anyway, let's continue. And then the goat goddess is goats.
I think. And who can forget
I
this
think.
incredible quote that defines the entire setting? Forget the power of technology and science, for so much has been forgotten, never to be relearned. Forget the promise of progress and understanding, for in the grim dark future there is only war. There is no peace amongst the stars, only an eternity of carnage and slaughter, and the laughter of thirsting gods. This idea...
Yeah. Yes. I'm not going to disagree. That is the quote. That is what the setting is about. But the whole point is that the entire thing is satire. The entire thing is parody. It is parodying all sorts of things. It is parodying the fucking Roman Empire. The fucking inventors of things like of slavery, of things like high art, but also the amount of negative things within humanity, like fascism or xenophobia, right? Because notoriously, the fucking Greeks and Romans, because that's another thing that the 40K draws from a lot, as an analog and analogy, is Roman Greek. And they were very well known for not being the most tolerant of people. They would allow you in if you identified as Greek and said that you were a Greek person. Shit. But if you were from anywhere below the Mediterranean, get your ass out and get on the field and fight that fucking lion.
It stands in stark contrast to the Whig theory of history, which is more common in our era. It's the one most...
An approach to historiography that presents history as a journey from oppressive to benighted to a glorious present. Well, technically, yes, it is. Everything now is technically better than what it was before. But there is still bad within everything, right? We are clearly living better than fucking serfs in the 1400s, right? And the people in 40K are clearly living better than most people nowadays because of all the advanced technology. But guess what? Just like here, where there are people fucking starving in Africa and third world countries, or impoverished nations, or all sorts of other shit that are filled with things like oppression, racism, and other things, that still happens in 40K too. You might be able to cure cancer like nothing, but guess what? A common cold could fucking kill somebody and... I don't know, name an impoverished country.
Normies believe in, and what's presented in seminal science fiction like Star Trek, where history is seen as a series of steps towards a better future. Things are always getting better in the long run, from cavemen to rocket ships, and from slavery and human sacrifice to universal human rights. But here, 40,000 years in the future, we still have slaves and human sacrifice. But in space...
Well, you still have that here too. Let's not forget cobalt and emerald mines in Africa. Let's not forget what Elon's daddy did, right? Like, oh, also let's not forget about, rampant sex trafficking, rampant trafficking in general, child soldiers, all sorts of other shit. Like, that still happens. But guess what? Today is still better than, again, 1,000 years ago. 40,000 years into the future, guess what? Life is still technically better, but it's still fucking grimdark and it sucks. You're getting served a drink by a fucking floating skull.
And we also have primitive cavemen flying in rocket ships for good measure, depending on which world the character hails from. In the Whig theory of history, the bringer of change becomes the protagonist of history, because history only moves forward to better eras and never regresses to harsher conditions. Therefore, those who bring social change are not seen with that much hostility, because if it's bad change, history would naturally purge it. In fact, it's people advocating for a conservative or traditional approach that are seen as suspicious a lot of the time. Because if newer is always better for everyone, then seeking to preserve the past is interpreted as inherently unjust or oppressive.
Where is he going with this? Is he going with, actually conservatism is a good thing because we need to not go forward with change? Is that where he's going with this? Because just because he said what he just said doesn't make it true. Purge history of something that didn't, if something good didn't happen, are we just going to forget the fact that, like, it took 400 years for slavery to be abolished, and then after that, shit was still fucked for almost 100 years after that, and it took until the 1960s for segregation to be fucking gotten rid of in the United States, while other places were much more accepting? Were they still racist? Fuck yes, they were still racist. But, yeah. Time has gotten better, but, oh my god, wow, crazy idea. There's also nuance to that, too. Is life better than it was in the 11th century with fucking Vikings in the Netherlands pillaging, raping, and going their way through fucking Britain? Yes, duh, of course it is. But does that mean that something bad has not happened and it still persists today? No! Because guess what? There is still institutional racism, even today, due to actions of a long time ago. Guess what? We technologically progressed, and societally we also progressed. But now, racism still in fact exists because of actions a long time ago. There is things like homophobia, even today, because of actions a long time ago. Even, and if you want to go so far as to say because of the view of certain religions that are archaic and benign today that should not be believed in now, is still believed in today as a excuse to prosecute and also harm queer people. Oh, and let's not forget, the biggest fucking thing ever. The Industrial Revolution happened. That was a great thing. It's led to a lot of great technology, but also guess fucking what now we have? We've got billionaires who don't care about the fucking planet. Oh, wow, the planet is dying. What happened to that? I thought you said that history was going to get fucking erased because we're always taking steps forward, but that's the narrative that this guy is saying for the video. So he's going to go along with this narrative to deliver a point of progressiveness or whatever is bad, or conservatism is good, and so on and so forth. Maybe, I don't know. I don't want to fucking assume, but so far that's where it seems like it's going. I'm 17 minutes into this video, and only 2 minutes have fucking passed.
To one group or another. It's one of the reasons why the word fascist is thrown around a lot. But in 40K, social change becomes dangerous because it's more likely something caused by the entropy of the universe.
Yeah, because fascism is a thing. Fascism is very much, by definition, happening a lot, everywhere. People just don't like to hear that word because they think that because we're suddenly calling out the issue of it after not calling out the issue, that it's like, oh, it must be made up. Oh, what do you mean? Fascism? You weren't complaining about that 5 years ago. Clearly now, because things aren't going your way, it must be wrong. Oh, wow, maybe it was because people were still being bombed fucking 10 years ago. Or fucking, I don't know. The entire country of fucking Russia has still been oligarchical and fascist since the 1980s. Let's not even get into the whole fucking dissolution that happened in 1991 and everything that happened there. Let's not talk about everything that happened with the fucking civil wars in Africa that were spurred on by other nations that were helping them. Or let's not, ignore the fact of like the Iran war and everything like that, and everything that was being fucked over in the Middle East, right? That must not have been fascism, right? Guys, we definitely went to the entire Middle East and carpet bombed it because everyone was bad there. Clearly.
Here personified by paranormal Reddit mods, the four gods of chaos. So the right side of history is not getting purged. for heresy. Civilization is always at the edge of collapse because its own existence isn't guaranteed, so progress would be much less so. Therefore, in this scenario, the trads win. There's more to lose by risking change than maintaining tradition, as the cult Mechanicus is well aware. Keep in mind, however, that progressivism isn't exclusively a political issue. The progressive versus conservative thing is mostly pop politics for the American context. In political
the Mechanicus is a good example of why the being of conservatism is good and to not prevent progress, as if the fact that the thing that's keeping them from, rediscovering nearly all the STCs and ancient weapons that fucking ships that could just launch black holes is due to that cult-like rhetoric and view of technology as being sacred and cannot be transformed in any form lest it be heretical. That is not a good thing. That is inherently stopping progress for a personal agenda to stop because of something that you personally believe in. That is not a good thing. Especially whenever you look deeper into the lore of the Mechanicus and Imperium and how they view the golden age of technology that humanity had during the Dark Age of Technology is now called the Dark Age of Technology because they viewed the way that technology was advancing was not a good thing, despite the fact that all the problems they had were fucking solved, besides overpopulation, because they were changing the form of technology and were going against the quote-unquote Messiah's will or whatever. That is not a good thing.
Theory progressivism is the belief that history cannot or should not ever move backwards, that we're always moving to newer, unprecedented historical eras where we're developing something new. Both right-wing.
No, that's not what progressivism means. Progressivism means is to take steps to move forward. Do not go backwards, but it does not mean that we are doing that. That is not what that means.
Wing and left-wing ideologies can either be progressive.
Also, this map is actually technically wrong because Kansas and Missouri were actually almost split perfectly down the middle. So, depending on what year this was.
Or reject it. Like anarcho-primitivism, which is a left-wing ideology that believes we should basically return to the Stone Age, because only then we'll all be equal, but in the mud. And the Futurist Party, in Italy, merged with fascism and moved very much to the right. Both the left-wing and the right-wing iteration of progressivism is explored in 40K, and both fail rather miserably. My point is that the grim dark universe of 40K is hostile to both left-wing progressive values and right-wing progressive values, which I'll elaborate on in a bit. Anyway, Warhammer 40K portrays a
Okay, let's just dissect that a little bit. Yes and no. So far, everything that it was happening, everything that he listed was kind of true. I don't know a lot about the Futurist Party of Italy, but Mussolini was most definitely a fascist, and typically within left-wing movements, the idea of anarcho-primitivism is not looked upon brightly. It is usually considered a form of eco-genocide because of it being influenced by fascist ideology and right-wing ideology. A lot of people like to say that Ted Kaczynski, was a leftist. He, in fact, was most certainly fucking not. He never even called himself that, no matter what. He literally actively talked about how bad, or in his view, bad things like socialism or communism or any left-wing or even democratic socialism, which is barely center-left, was a bad thing, and why technology was a poor thing to happen to technology, or to humanity, and why it needed to go back to a form of anarcho-ecoism, or whatever the fuck. And that identifies, by definition, with right-wing ideology because that goes back to traditional. The very idea of going backwards, by this guy's own, definition, is right-wing, because if left-wing does not go back, or does not want to go back, then that must mean that the other side has to do with that, because he has mentioned that right-wing and conservatism is about staying, sedentary to not progress forward. And then, by definition, the left-wing ideology he mentioned would therefore fall under his own definition of right-wing.
Universe where the natural state of life is war, and peace is the result of order imposed by an artificial state, preferably governed by a powerful sovereign, like what Thomas Hobbes says, which makes stability more important than progress. The Imperium,
which is not peace. Peace is when there is justice for all. That is peace. What most people think of peace as no issues happening, but there are still issues underlying, but no one talks about it, that is called complacency. That is also what this Hobbes guy is talking about clearly. Well, he thinks it's a good thing, from what I'm assuming.
of man is famous for being over the top, with its hellish hive worlds covered in factory pollution and non-stop acid rain. And of course we can't forget its massive military of billions of disposable soldiers thrown into an endless cosmic meat grinder and ginormous genetically enhanced super soldiers fighting furries. I'm not even kidding. 40k is so insane that the Flash Gets parody animation fits perfectly with canon. But again, what you have to understand when it comes to the absurdity of the Imperium of Man is that its nature is a direct result of its setting. Humans and Eldar tried other models of galactic civilization and it always crumbled under the weight of the universe. Why? Because of the very nature of reality. When this universe began to form, one of the first things to emerge were the Citan, that feed off of stars and planets to exist. This principle that to live you must devour something else is the core of life. Then, when the Old Ones become the first interstellar civilization, they formed a temporary paradise where they lived forever and went around seeding life on various planets until another civilization, called the Necrontyr, went to war against them because they were born in a crappy planet and had to fight for a better existence. Which leads to the paradise that the Old Ones built for themselves being wiped out after the Necrontyr joined forces with the ever-hungry Citan. The historical eras of the galaxy change after catastrophes caused by the inherent evolutionary hunger that drives living organisms.
Except, what is he getting at here? That, again, it's a cycle of evil and war that causes downfall and not the idea of progress? Because look at this. The Necrons they did progress very far technologically, but guess what? They were literally living in the fucking shadows of their past. That's why tomb worlds are so fucking tragic, is because the tombs that they were actively building to bury more people because of how much they were dying, they were living in the shadows of those tombs. How much more fucking blatant do you have to get that the Necrons were advanced technologically, but they were also living fundamentally in the past? So much so that it was looming over them and casting a shadow on them. Look, 40k is very, very blatant with its symbolism, but somehow people still don't get the idea. The Necrons are the bad guys. They are the fucking space Egyptian pharaoh-like Egyptology, kind of aesthetic, pushed to the nth degree, filled with technology that is literally harvesting the souls off of other fucking creatures to then try and live. And then guess what? They then make fucking psychic engrams to implant into metal bodies so that they can continue to live in the past and try and regain the past. That is literally the opposite of progressivism.
Whether for pleasure, improvement of circumstances, or just plain old animal instinct to devour. Once the previous era collapses, the cycle begins again. This is a running theme in this universe. The Star Trek-like technologically progressive human civilization that first spread to the stars in the dark age of technology was destroyed because of unfettered technological progress, which made humanity build artificial intelligence systems it couldn't control. The Eldar created...
We still don't know exactly why the Men of Iron actually rebelled. Some people think and theorize it could have been something from within that made a virus that made all of them go bad. Some people think that the men of iron weren't actually artificial intelligence, but the men of stone and the men of gold were actually people and were actually technically slaves. There is a lot. We do not know a lot about the Dark Age of technology outside of what we have already been told. It was not rampant technological stuff that happened. It was actually the fact that because they were spread so thin and could not stop this idea due to a lack of technology, they did not survive. Could they have survived if they didn't have the technology? Yes, but in that situation, they did not have enough technology to overcome the challenge in front of them. And guess what happened? Techno-barbarians came about, baby. Terra was turned into fucking a wasteland. It became Mad Max again. And then the Emperor came in, and then the Age of Strife happened. He came about, and guess immediately what he does? He immediately subjugates people, and that doesn't turn out fucking well. Because guess what? The Emperor's plan all along was not to be a good guy. He wanted to be a god. There are very many interpretations of his character that throughout, even in the Dark Age of technology, whenever he said that he was being, like, doing good things, or Age of Strife and the Great Crusade and so on, he was not actually a good guy whatsoever. He was fucking horrendously evil. That's because that's the whole thing that makes the Emperor so complicated. People view him differently, quite literally, in the lore because of his psychic image, but also because of the fact that at the end of the day, he is just a man that is also a god and wants nothing but power and wants to save humanity at any cost, even if it costs humanity itself. It's such a backwards idea, and that, as an idea, is anti-progressive.
Post-scarcity society of a pleasure paradise, which made them so sexually depraved and degenerate that the entire civilization collapsed, and billions of their people died horrific deaths as their souls were consumed by the manifestation of their excess. Because the chaos gods in general are always beyond the veil of material reality, and seeking to tempt mortals into dysfunctional pathological behavior that they can use to control and possess the souls of those of weak faith. And the Tyranids represent the relentless hunger of nature, since their biological...
It really isn't weak faith, because yes, faith in the Emperor does help. It does get them through, but it also, you know, I'm sorry. You know, the most popular result of praising the Emperor too much is being corrupted by one of the chaos gods over zealotry. That's like, I've been playing Darktide a lot recently. That is literally one of the main reasons for one of the main characters is that they are too much of a zealot. That they got partially corrupted. And usually the way that you resist corruption by chaos is by having a strong willpower. It is not faith in one thing or another, it is strong willpower. And yes, the Tyranids are a reflection of nature, but it's also a reflection of dark nature, the brutality of nature, not just nature in general. That's why they are literally also in a very metaphysical way, but also pretty blatantly. They are also a parody or an analog for the idea of literal intelligent design and how that goes badly within nature when it's uncontrolled. And there is no idea of like humanity or soul or anything like that, because it is just one thing, constantly evolving and picking and choosing from an infinite library to intelligently design new things to eat and destroy and just grow bigger. It is unfettered evolution that had never developed the idea of empathy.
logical intergalactic predators that seeks to devour all biomass in the Milky Way. But they also use gene-stealer cults that infiltrate human society to prepare planets for invasion. This is not a universe that rewards the mainstream progressive values of diversity, equity, and inclusion of an open society inspired by Karl Popper and associated with the American left. And it also does not reward the small government limited by individual rights.
Again, kind of just throwing around buzzwords, literally mentioning and dropping DEI. But let's not forget the fact that by the time, for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, for nearly half of the lifetime of the Imperium, they were good. They were fine. Technologically, they could only be rivaled by the fucking Eldar. That was it. And then guess what happened? Everything went bad. And then the modern Imperium comes about. And even now, despite the fact of how conservative the modern Imperium is, they are still being fucked over by the chaos and the Great Grift, and then everything with the Indomitus Crusade, and then the 13th Black Crusade, and Abaddon, and then everything with Angron, and I like how he said this is not going to be a typical culture war. This is not going to be a simple culture war. Oh, it is. It's not simple. It's getting pretty fucking complicated.
Freedom of speech and pursuit of happiness, like in a liberal society inspired by John Locke, associated with the American right. And I mean the original definition of liberal here. And this is because all that just gives room for aliens.
Well, typically, those very ideas that he mentioned of free speech and so on and so forth is not typically associated with conservatism, because, you know, the idea of conserving, it's there. This is not like an etymological fallacy either. It is by definition today, and in the word modernly associated with the idea of conservatism. The idea of freedom of speech is only whenever certain people can say whatever they want, and if you say something that they don't like, then they get mad at you. That's not freedom of speech. That's just you saying whatever you want. True freedom of speech is whenever you can say something in retaliation to somebody else saying something. And let's not forget, most of the time, people on the right that talk about freedom of speech is just because they want to say some shit that's fucking edgy. And then people get upset. Or, you know, like the platform that they're on that have a terms of service of, hey, don't say something. Suddenly it's about censorship, despite the fact that they are, of their own consent, using a platform that is very certain, clearly has certain rules to not say certain things. Yeah. 6 minutes in, and I've already talked 37 minutes. God damn.
And demons to subvert your society from the inside out. Instead, this universe rewards hierarchy, cohesion, and exclusion, as well as intense discipline. And by reward, I mean you get to keep existing in this bleak reality. In any case, if the Imperium of Man starts having gender affirmative action quotas for the castrated, muscle-bound murder,
again, not a simple culture war. Complicated culture war, clearly, because we're getting into fucking talking about female custodies. I'm gonna say it right now. Why the fuck would the emperor, who loves humanity, only make males whenever there's 50% of the population that also is the opposite gender? Why would he not use those? That's just bad writing. Especially whenever the fact that the custodians have no, like, there is nothing about gender that involves them in terms of strength or anything. In that case, it's just Big E being fucking stupid. And not including females. Despite the fact that he canonically had children with the mother of the Primarchs. Well, not, you know, traditional. You know what I mean. But, like, gender affirm. Oh my god, that's fucking dork. Oh my god. You are not rewarded for rhetoric in 40K. You do not get to survive longer. If anything, it's grimdark for a reason, because guess what? When you believe in nothing but rhetoric in this future, you die fucking anyway, and usually in the worst way possible. Because guess what that rhetoric leads to? That rhetoric leads you to believe in the Emperor. That rhetoric leaves you to become an aspirant. That means you become a Space Marine. Guess what happens to you as a Space Marine? There's a 50-50 chance that you fall to chaos, 50-50 chance that you then die in the line of action, or you just remain an atheist for the rest of your life, or you're a Black Templar that wipes his ass with the Codex Astartes. Even within Black Templars are another great example of the fact that even within the Imperium's idea of conservatism, of how that is a good thing, of staying stagnant, of exclusion and so on and so forth, that there are even those from within that don't agree with that and don't think it's enough. And then you get people like the fucking Black Templars that exist. And then you get people that fall to chaos. Then you also have the very idea of the Horus heresy happening in the fucking first place. And the entire thing that happened with Horus and his father and all of that. It is not a result of female custodies. It is not a result of there being female guardsmen or anything like that. It is much deeper than, oh, well, actually, conservatism is a good thing. And also, he says that that 40K makes fun of both left and the right, but then makes it a very big point of why the right-wing ideology is the one that succeeds, and actively talks about why that's the good one. Even under the veneer of saying, like, well, actually, both of them are bad in this universe, but don't forget, the one where you get to live a lot longer is the one where you're a xenophobe.
Machines of the Space Marines, it'll feel very...
Oh, and also, by the way, let's state this very blatantly right now. The idea of exclusion and xenophobia being the thing that makes you live long enough, let's not forget, there have been many books where the Imperium teams up with another race. And there was a book where the Imperium teams up with the Drukhari, and they nearly finish off Chaos for fucking good. They nearly close the Great Rift for good in that book until the very fucking end, where some shit bad goes awry. And then they go back to their conservative ways, and then that keeps the Great Rift open. If that is not an idea that no matter what in this grim dark future, that the idea of collaboration and you getting your fucking head out of your ass will actually solve more problems than cause them, I don't know what is. And that is not a modern wokehammer thing. That is something that has been talked about time and time again throughout the entirety of fucking 40K. What is the thing keeping the fucking Emperor alive? Oh, I don't know. Maybe it's the fact that it's a combination of both human technology, Drukhari, or Dark Eldar technology, and Necron technology. That's the thing keeping your fucking king on the golden throne. Is collaboration with other fucking...
very out of place and very forced. The Tau faction is the closest thing to an inclusive society in the setting, but even they have a caste system, so not very egalitarian, and their native utopian beliefs are getting crushed the more they learn about just how insane their universe is. Their plot arc is them being forced to become more brutal to survive.
For the Tau Empire, a gene stealer from High Fleet Gorgon made for a fascinating test subject. Their mistake was that after it was captured by the Earthcast, and during their substantial analysis, a worker was implanted with the germ seed. Over the following 20 years, Earthcast laboratory workers increasingly noticed many distorted anatomies throughout the labs. But this intriguing development was actually accepted as the philosophy of the greater good promotes a tolerance of alien life forms. It wasn't until a bloody schism broke out that the Firecast was brought in, and they had a hard time clearing out the extensive underground research facility.
Mind you, this is not an idea of tolerance being a bad thing. This is an idea of tolerance of everything being a fence sitter or being like centrist or whatever, and not putting your fucking boot down and not allowing intolerance. That, if anything, is actually what that is talking about. That is very clear. Like, I don't know how that can be even more clear. The idea of, yes, you can be tolerant, but being overly tolerant allows bad shit to happen. That is a fundamental teaching of a lot of movements in progressive movements of, yes, be tolerant, but also be intolerant of intolerance. And again, this whole idea just backs up the fact that the Tau, while being tolerant of alien life forms, are not the haha mimi whatever the fuck space communist socialists whatever the fuck. They're actually just space libertarians. They say that they're tolerant and all this other stuff, but they actually have a caste system. And then they also they are very brutal whenever the time comes, but hey, they will be inclusive if you work for them. That sounds like libertarianism to me.
Facilities.
And as you can imagine, due to our current times, Games Workshop, the company that owns Warhammer, is in a bit of a conundrum with this fictional setting, because the corporate elites in the West adopted a progressive and egalitarian set of values, which they feel obliged to defend and spread through their platforms. But it's literally impossible to do that with 40k without destroying the entire...
Not the fucking woke hammer thing. Not the fucking woke billionaire idea. Guess what? Surprise, surprise, anyone that actually believes that this whole egalitarian facade is actually them trying to be inclusive are fucking morons. Literal lobotomites. If you actually genuinely believe that billionaires actually care about, like, progress. No, they do it because guess what? The world around them wants to be more progressive and they want more money. So they're like, okay, fine, we'll have your Pride Month for like a month and then immediately change it. We'll say and like do all these like deals or whatever, but guess what? That still fundamentally is influencing and bettering us, not you, because you're still giving us money, you fucking moron. Like... The idea that billionaires are actually egalitarian is so fucking funny, because guess what? All the billionaires, if we want to like what this guy is doing, considering only the West, and specifically only America, despite the fact that Games Workshop is a European company, that the billionaires in America are only doing this as a facade, but are actively lobbying against actual change. Actual change that people that are buying their shit are talking and speaking out on. The idea of pipelines and, renewable sources and so on and so forth, they will fucking massive places of like big oil will say that they love progress, but the moment that there is a hint, a fucking whiff of them getting in their way, back to conservatism. No, actually, we're going to send in our private military to actively defend our pipelines because we pay them a lot more and you are getting paid a lot less.
Their setting, because it's completely antithetical to the very idea of progress. Which makes sense because left-wing progressive values are based on Rousseau's noble savage idea of nature being inherently benign and providing equally for everyone. And these axioms are precisely...
What the fuck? Okay, one, yes and no. Technically, yes, nature does offer everything it needs because of the way that fucking food chains operate. There should only be so little of apex predators. There should only be so much of tertiary, secondary, and other niches. And whenever a biosphere or biome or biodiverse environment becomes unstable, guess what? The entire fucking thing crumbles. That's one of the reasons why humans fucked up a lot of ecosystems so much that we had to intervene and start re-adding things like wolves back into the environment so that they can cull the populations so that the entire biosphere doesn't fucking collapse in on itself and shit itself. So yes, also noble savage, I don't think he knows what that word means, because usually the term noble savage is in reference to something totally different.
Precisely the opposite of the Warhammer Milky Way galaxy, putting it mildly. And it gets especially awkward when it comes to inclusivity of sexual identity. Not in the 40k universe as a whole, because, there's an entire faction that includes all the identities that you would want in that department. But I'm talking about how one of the writers was caught trying to shoehorn gender transitioning into the Imperium of Man. But it doesn't.
As if the idea of transhumanism isn't already a thing with the very concept of fucking Space Marines, Mechanicus. Literally name a transhuman thing that goes on in 40k, and it's already happening. Also, the idea of people transitioning does not change the dark future. That is such a small, minor thing. That is so small. That does not affect anything whatsoever. That is such a nonsense fucking, oh my god. Literally baby whining right now, being like, oh, it's antithetical to the setting. We can't have trans people. We can't have a single thing, because that means that the entire dark future is not dark anymore because trans people exist. Guys, where's my 9-foot tall buff man at? That is what these people are whining about. Got caught shoving it. Oh my god. It's even funnier because he has a Mechanicus in the background right here, as if they aren't the very idea of changing their fucking... The literal idea of transness, of changing your body to fit something that you want to be instead, because you're not comfortable in the skin that you are already in. There is an entire planet of trans people, not transgender people, but trans people as a concept of transitioning from one state of being to another. Mars is filled with trans people.
It makes sense because not only is this a universe where sexual activity and pleasure have to be tightly disciplined, otherwise an interdimensional literal sex fiend will infect your society with temptation and unravel it from the inside. But androgynous, non-binary sexuality is associated with decadence and societal collapse. Because
No. No. You're not going to get away with that one, bud. Look. Let's hear that one more time.
And it gets especially awkward when it comes to inclusivity of sexual identity. Not in the 40k universe as a whole, because, there's an entire faction that includes all the identities that you would want in that department. But I'm talking about how one of the writers was caught trying to shoehorn gender transitioning into the Imperium of Man.
Shoehorn, and it's a single fucking line. Yeah, alright.
But it doesn't make sense because not only is this a universe where sexual activity and pleasure have to be tightly disciplined, otherwise an interdimensional literal sex fiend will infect your...
No. That is not how Slaanesh works. That is not how Slaanesh works. The idea, as I've already spoken about, of Slaanesh is the concept of overconsumption. Pleasures of all kinds, because guess what? Slaanesh is not only sex. They are also things like drugs, alcohol, food, gluttony. They are all of those physical worldly pleasures knocked up to 10. The idea of somebody getting gender transitioned being a bad thing, not only is that on you being homophobic and transphobic, but also the very concept that gender identity and queerness is inherently tied to sex is also homophobic, because there are plenty of people, there are plenty of queer people out there that are very much prudes, and they are not a monolith. Queerness does not relate to sex. of being depraved, and so on and so forth. Much like heterosexuality does not automatically mean sex either. Romantic love, all sorts of the other labels of love and so on, are also tied in with sex. And guess what? Heterosexual sex will also get fucking Slaanesh out there when you start killing people when you rape them. That is what it is. It is not purely sex. It is not unrestrained sex. And it is not gender reaffirming surgeries. Because the very concept of gender reaffirming surgeries is not inherently sexual by itself. It is not only sexual.
With temptation and unravel it from the inside, but androgynous non-binary sexuality is associated with decadence and societal collapse, because Slaanesh is highly associated with that. From having several different pronouns to also influencing his/her followers into having surgical alterations to their bodies, and Slaanesh followers often become hermaphrodites, with a female breast on one side and a male chest on the other.
Okay. This was the entire point of this video, was to talk about this right here. Let's go down the list. Body modifications. Not inherently a bad thing, until it's the fact that they are literally mutilating their genitals and tearing them and putting teeth on them, and then also giving bodily modifications to make themselves more violent and be able to have more pleasure easily. Again, violence tied with pleasure non-consensually. Oh, and the hermaphrodite thing? That is not inherently bad. It is the idea that, oh, here's some nuance. The chaos gods are nuanced. They are doing that so that they can have more decadent pleasure of all types. It is not the very idea that being non-binary is bad. That is not what that means. It is very clearly saying they have one tit on the one side and a breast on the other, to say that they are both, so that they can, one, fuck everything that they want in eyesight, while also being a literal embodiment of sex. But not just normal sex. Violent, depraved, very, very unconsensual sex. And again, need I remind you, the Slaanesh is not only sex. Focusing purely on that is just to get your own agenda across and say that 40K is anti-trans, anti-queer, anti-whatever. And if it is, that is a bad thing. But guess what? It actually isn't. It is actively talking about how overindulgence in pleasures is a bad thing. And how bodily modifying yourself to be more violent and more sexually depraved is also a bad thing. Because there is a far and away difference between you being some BDSM dude, or being heavily modified, or being like the fucking quote unquote demon insert image of the guy that had a bunch of had his nose removed and looks like a demon now. That's far and away from that to being literally corrupted into being a physical monster that knows nothing but sex, pleasure, food, eating, music, being loud, and all sorts of other stuff. Because remember, noise marines, it is not... What is noise marines? Because they're associated with Slaanesh, now automatically means that 40K is saying that music is bad? Music is a bad thing? No. It's the idea of noise being turned to such a degree to where it literally hurts you and is literally causing boils to form on your skin from how loud the frequency is, that most noise marines are actually deaf. That's the bad thing. Because again, surprise, fucking surprise, Slaanesh isn't just the idea of these things, of noise, sex, food, so on and so forth, or even gender. It is the idea of it taken to such the violent degree that corrupts the very concept of it in the first place and turns it nefarious. Gender reassignment surgery? In the eyes of Slaanesh, doesn't fucking matter. But the moment you start reaffirming your gender to then also have weapons in your titties and start fucking non-consensually sexually assaulting people, now you got their attention.
And just look at this symbol of Slaanesh. Doesn't it remind you of something? And if you think this is awkward for Games Workshop, wait till you
The trans icon, despite the fact that very clearly just looks like either of the gender icons. Wow. It's almost like that's symbolism to show the theme that Slaanesh is tied to sex. Wow.
find out how in Warhammer lore, artists and political elites easily fall under the sway of Slaanesh and spread his/her influence in their societies so that...
See how this guy is absolutely trying to not say they? I mean, Slaanesh is most commonly associated as a she. I just say they just to fucking say it. And guess what? The reason why high nobles fall under the sway of Slaanesh is because they are depraved fucks who only ever want sex as a form of pleasure only for them. That's it. Nothing else. That's the only reason why they fall under the influence of Slaanesh. It is not anything else.
that it can be destroyed by chaos, which means that a lot of this ESG stuff and pushing this message makes GW resemble Slaaneshi cultists in their own lore. But I want to make clear that this doesn't...
Notice that this guy is very clearly talking about, he's like, well, actually, both sides are being made fun of, but actively talking about with a rant sona that is a Templar with a cross on the side of it and is set in a medieval town. And now, not to say the Templars don't look cool, but typically the people that complain about Warhammer and also have that, usually, you know, if a duck quacks, tend to also be highly conservative.
apply to simple homosexuality though. Historically speaking, lesbianism has been typically tolerated by several hegemonic empires, and warrior cultures like Japan have had homosexuality enshrined in their books like the Hagakure. Which is about...
Yes, but now suddenly that's different for 40k. What are you getting at?
obedience to your lord, and if your lord wants you to take his sword up your scabbard, you're obliged to obey.
Japan is the greatest, wonderful culture of manly love.
So the few cases of homosexuality that you see perfectly tolerated in the Imperium of Man, in several of the books, as outlined by Major Kill in one of his videos, is actually perfectly plausible for this kind of empire. It's the transgender surgeries and the fall of gender roles, which would not make any sense in the patriarchal...
What? The moment trans people, it's suddenly bad. Despite the fact that, if you want to view it from a very pessimistic way, now there's more men or women to serve patriarchal roles, despite the fact that kind of not really is the Imperium patriarchal. It is, but there's also a lot of shit that it isn't, because there's always been women in power. There's always been women in positions of strength. The Sisters of Battle, the Sisters of Silence, you know, fucking, like, the sororists, and those are also the same thing. I'm just saying a different word. You know, fucking commanders, guardsmen. The idea that women should not be on the front lines in 40k is a fucking stupid one that has never been a fact. Women not being in positions of power has never been a thing, nor has the idea of patriarchal roles serving such an important thing that now suddenly women are, like, have a place when the only thing that humans serve are cattle in 40k. That's it. You are just cattle. You are just slaves. You are just soldiers. You are cogs in a machine. And that is the empire. Like, everyone on Terra lives in fucking squalor constantly.
Imperium of man. It would be immediately interpreted as Slaaneshi activity. I mean, if our planet...
Yes, immediately Slaanesh. Because single person gets a transgender reassignment, the West has fallen. That's basically what he is saying. That the very concept that gender roles are not what they seem in 40k must mean that they will be susceptible to Slaanesh, despite the fact that if that's a retcon, but that everything else has been fine beforehand, and now this new thing over the course of 40,000 years have been revealed to have always been there, you're just a fucking idiot.
Existed in the Warhammer universe, with Spanish politicians eating poop, sex-crazed political staffers filming anal prawn in the American Senate building,
Say
the
porn.
Luther resorts for politicians, complete with pagan temples on those islands, and whatever the fuck the Irish were doing in Eurovision.
Do you know what makes...
Oh my god, this guy's a fucking moron. Eurovision. It's literally just that person fucking doing arts and whatever the fuck they want. That's not a bad thing. Guess what? Those people that were doing anal porn in the fucking Senate in America were two conservatives that were actively talking about gay bills and don't say gay and other things like that. Not going to mention that, are you? Or I don't fucking know. Literally any of... This guy is literally just saying that the fall of the West is because of trans people. What does this have to do with 40k? He's literally just saying this just so he can get his own idea out there.
Makes me special? I'm a queer. And I'm a witch!
We would clearly be suffering a total Slaaneshi takeover. I believe this...
No, the fuck we wouldn't be, because we are not fucking raping people. We are not killing them while we are raping them. We are not so decadent in sexual depravity that everywhere on the planet is sex, 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 because again, the idea of transness and being slightly different from the norm does not result in Slaanesh if you read the fucking books. Because guess what? The first thing that anyone that is even slightly different, they don't go to Slaanesh. Anyone that is a noise marine or a chaos marine of Slaanesh or so on and so forth is so violently different than what they were beforehand, even whenever they were committing all the sexual depravity, all the other shit. They are so far and away different that they are literal just monsters now. They're not people in costumes. They're not anything like that. They are literally become actual fucking demons with warped chaos powers.
idea of the Eldar's civilizational collapse due to hedonism
was not just hedonism. It was hedonism on such a large scale that it caused parties of orgies to persist for so fucking long. If you know 40k, you actually know what was going on.
inspired by ideas expressed by famous academics like Camille Paglia, a professor from Yale who postulates a correlation between gender ambiguity with the fall of empires.
Was that my overview of history, my noticing that in late phases,
right.
you all of a sudden get a proliferation of homosexuality, of sadomasochism, of gender games and impersonations and masks and so on. So I believe we're in a late phase. We're in a late phase of culture.
So that the...
Well, clearly someone says it, so it must be true, guys. Clearly, a person who postulates, and I say all these really big, fancy words, I must be right, guys? Guys, I have to be right, right? Guys, 40k is saying that fat people are bad. Guys, 40k is saying that women are bad, and that men are also bad, because they're also in Slaanesh cults. Guys, look at this image. Look, all these, yeah. Don't mind the fact that literally the shit that they are wearing is BDSM gear that's taken up to the nth degree to not just be BDSM gear, but it's also inherently violent, to be, dangerous by nature. Don't mention that one, that it's literally hedonism taken to the nth degree.
The proliferation of cultural identities, the proliferation of all sorts of possibilities is actually a sign that we're
on the verge of collapse.
Yeah.
Yes, Western culture is in decline. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Okay.
The West is definitely in decline, and this era will be the laughingstock of history. Even more.
Oh, you're such a fucking idiot, dude. Actual literal lobotomite, dude. Genuine troglodytic fucking moronic activity here. Halfway through a Warhammer video, he starts going on about the West has fallen, you absolute fucking chud. The West is falling not because of trans people, not because of gay people, or whatever the fuck. It's because of politicians not actually giving a fuck about anything and only wanting to line their pockets, sacrificing human lives to bolster their wealth and businesses, and then continue the cycle of violence of war. Oh wow, does that sound familiar? Oh, it's fucking 40K, and that's what's actually causing the decline of both empires? That's fucking nuts. Who would have thought that that's actually what's going on? But clearly that must not be what's going on, because conservatism is based. Conservatism is good. Trans people bad, but some gay people are good as long as they say what they're told. Seen, not heard. Seen, not heard.
More so by the fact that it's painstakingly recorded by our digital devices. A lot of this crap on TikTok will be analyzed by future historians as symptoms of decline. Heck, it might even make...
Wow, guys, we really need to take this guy seriously, because he is making fun of anti-punks, or punks that are saying shit like Nazis bad on this bridge here and flipping off the camera and all this other shit, as if, oh, I don't know, here, throw up a bunch of pictures of people in World War II that is always glorified, of people like making shit with like dicks, or, you know, memes, or all this other shit, or people being weird all over the fucking course of time. You fucking moron.
Make it into their children's educational system. Like, okay kids, as we learned from our studies of American history, if you see one of your fellow classmates dressing up like a cartoon animal and meowing like a cat, bully the shit out of that mother hugger for the sake of our glorious empire.
Guys, oh my god, isn't it so funny? He's using cheems. Holy shit, guys, that's so fucking Reddit funny based soy jack party. Oh my god, so funny, guys. Oh, fucking idiot. Wow, he's bringing up people wearing cat because that happened like once or twice, or people know that one weird person, quote-unquote weird person in high school or whatever. Oh my god, they're putting litter boxes in high schools, says The Onion, and we must believe The Onion.
That the universe of 40K can very much be a result of the Anglosphere's subconscious. It feels like the English-speaking world coming to terms with their own decline.
Why the fuck are you using AI art to make this shit whenever there's a literal actual fucking art of this?
A fictional narrative. The parallels are definitely there, down to the rise of the suspiciously named Tao, who seem oddly Chinese. They're a rising empire challenging the hegemony of the Imperium of Man. Even though China in real life has its own problems.
Oh, hey, Serdar! Max, have you seen the
Atheist
oddly Chinese? Oddly What? What?
governments have never lasted more than 100 years, and China is fast approaching that expiration date. In any case, the subconscious...
Yes, very clearly approaching the expiration date, because they're, building more railways now than any other country ever, and have a higher life expectancy rate of any country, and are actively having some of the best prices for fucking anything ever. Okay. Oddly Chinese. That is a quote.
This story explanation would explain the profound skepticism of progress throughout the setting, seeing it as merely a stage before the inevitable downfall, since skepticism of the progressive view of history is getting more and more mainstream.
Despite the fact he hasn't talked about the fact that the emperor literally wanted progress throughout the entire time, and then he died, and then because there was no leader to properly tell them, hey, don't deify me as a god,
the Anglosphere. The rise in popularity of cyclical theories of history since the pandemic are a sign of this. Not only a revival of interest in Oswald Spengler, but new academics developing very interesting theories of history, like Peter Turchin in his secular cycles and cleodynamics idea. We can all feel a decline, even academia, which is saying something. Progressive idealism in general, whether left-wing or right-wing, is unsustainable in Warhammer, as we see with the Great Crusade era of 30k, when the Emperor wasn't comatose and was walking around with a golden halo around his head. In that era, the Imperium was highly progressive in its founding mythology, but it was more of a supremacist type of manifest destiny, where the people is guaranteed to march to a bright future as the rulers of an expanding territory. It's the view where the people or empire in question are special, and will be the heralds of an unprecedented new era of civilization. All other civilizations were to be wiped out, subjugated, or cast aside. It also had a revanchist attitude against foreigners and notions of imperial revival and reclamation of lost territory, etc. And this failed spectacularly as the Imperium fell in the civil war of the Horus Heresy, where the noble warriors of civilization were now tearing it apart and put the Emperor into the Stephen Hawking position, but without a text-to-speech device. I mean, could you imagine? In fact, the 40k era of the Empire is different and less xenophobic by necessity. Guilliman was revived with the help of the Eldar, and the Tau have established diplomatic relations with the Imperium. The chauvinism of the founding Imperium turned out to be wrong, and collaborating with other civilizations against the raging of chaos that threatens them all is much more effective. But the older Imperium insisted on the great march of our civilization mentality by getting high up on supremacist ideals. The Imperium of Man was an incredibly idealist political project for humanity, seeking to embody a vision of a rationalist humanist utopia under the Emperor's guidance. Free from dogmatism, except for the imperial truth. Free from holy wars, except for a great crusade. And free to pursue knowledge, except for the psychic phenomenon. Hypocrisy aside, the very failure of the atheist, modernist, and humanist version of the Imperium, and the rise of a religious cult surrounding the leader as the backdrop of the entire setting, is at the core of what the Imperium and Warhammer as a whole is. Which is not fascism. I repeat, it's not fascism. Now I get where the misconception comes from. They're genocidal authoritarians who literally worship their government. I guess it looks sus to the average normie. And it's definitely sus, but way beyond anything popular political discourse is able to analyze. Now I don't want to sound like a pretentious twat, but that's because most people have the political vocabulary of like 5 words. And I have no doubt that many of the people in the creative team at Games Workshop actually think that they're being big brain boys, parroting fascism, and sticking up to those right-wingers, when they actually depict a...
Wow, guys, look, he brought up Fallout. He brought up Fallout. Guys, he brought up Fallout. Except it's always been about fascism. They literally said in the very fucking beginning that they were fascists. To say that they aren't fascists is antithetical because, guys, the boot fucking fits. The glove fits. You don't acquit. This is the fucking guy. They are fucking fascists. They are. They literally are. And guess what? There are people out there that are just like this guy talking about Warhammer and how base Warhammer is because they're fascists. And we need to be like the Imperium. And then there's people like him who say, well, actually, no, they're not, but they're still base, but they're not fascists. They're the guys. They're not fascists. Despite the fact he literally describes fascism and then says, well, actually, they're very much beyond our political understanding. No, the fuck they're not, you moron. They're fascists. Because that's a very broad stroke amount of fascism, mind you.
Something else entirely. Just like...
Totalitarian, authoritarian, xenophobic, non-altruistic fucking fascists.
The big brain boys behind the Fallout Amazon show think that they're criticizing capitalism in that scene with Mr. House, when they actually perfectly depicted the anti-capitalist managerial revolution described by James Burnham, the paleo-conservative thinker. My point is, a lot of these people have...
Guys, he brought up capitalism. What is he, me? Except, you're just kind of fucking assuming that it was based off of that or whatever. Despite the fact, I've already talked about the Fallout show. I love the Fallout show. And you might be like, oh, guys, you like the Fallout show. It doesn't matter if I make this video or not, because this guy is, even if he watches and responds, it's not like we can have a debate that actually ends in, like, good discourse or anything. We're not going to agree on anything. Like, oh my god.
Have no clue what they're doing when they shove politics into their stories. However, Games Workshop...
Yes, shove politics into the stories, except for the fact that politics, by your definition, when it's bad, is whenever it talks about anti-capitalism, and then gender identity and anything like that. That's bad. But the xenophobia and the conservatism and how that's based, that's good, guys, that's good.
Does have people with interesting and respectable insights, however. Like I said, it's a massive collaborative effort, and many are immensely praiseworthy in what they accomplished as creative talent. But regardless, the Imperium is actually much worse than fascism. Answer me this. Are the ancient Romans fascist? What about the ancient Assyrians? The Mongolians? What about the Aztecs? My point is, genocidal authoritarian societies are a dime a dozen in human history, and 40k is like...
Well, they're worse than fascist. Don't call them fascist. Okay, if they're worse than fascist, then what are they? Oh, you can't name something? Okay, then what's the closest fucking word to use? Fascist!
The commentary on the entirety of that history. It's why we have space Vikings. Are they fascist? 40k goes way beyond what the Italians did for a couple of decades in the 20th century. The Imperium of Man is an amalgamation of the most brutal, over-the-top elements of human history.
Yes. Yes. It says that in the very beginning of the thing. This is the worst regime possible to be imagined. Guess what that means? That's fascism, guys. Oh my fucking god.
Imperial cult that worships the emperor, the brutal factory conditions from Victorian England, and the constant stream of thousands of human sacrifices to keep the universe going from the Aztecs. Not to mention World War I.
Not just the Aztecs, by the way. I mean, are we just want to forget that fucking the idea of sacrifice is kind of like built upon like 3 major religions?
Trench warfare fighting with the Krieg Corps and the Katakan Space Vietnam, etc. But it takes most of its inspiration from the Middle Ages. The Imperium of Man in 40k era is actually a postmodern neo-medieval state. The Imperium is a goth emo version of the Holy Roman Empire on several levels of shrooms and steroids. Down to the Emperor being mostly a figurehead presiding over a loosely connected federation of several planets, all with their own governments, cultures, and traditions. The state itself is ruled by several competing institutions that are all autonomous from each other, but united under a single central figure who doesn't really run anything. Not in the modern sense, anyway. It's a classic case of medievalism, but a grim, dark version of it. Just because something is authoritarian and xenophobic and violent doesn't make it fascist, since these things are...
You literally just said it's worse than fascism, dog. You're being hypocritical.
Again, like I've said, have been around forever. My point is that a kaleidoscope of overlapping organizations and autonomous diverse regions with several different identities is not what Mussolini had in mind when he founded fascism. Fascism is a specific political doctrine written by Mussolini and Giovanni.
This is quite literally an etymological fallacy and a chronological fallacy, because you're saying that, whenever the word was invented, it was not what it was meaning, so now we can't use that as a modern word to describe something new. And also, like, that those are 2 fallacies at once, dog, that do not help your argument. They are still fascists. By the modern definition that you have literally laid out, the Imperium of Man is fascist. Literally, in your own words, worse than fascist. But guess what? We don't have a word for worse than fascists. Unless you want to say, like, Nazi or whatever. But, guys, what other word do you use?
Gentili, in their essay book called The Doctrine of Fascism. I get more into it in my video, It's Not Fascism, Bro. But for the sake of time, I had to cut off the part where I explain why Warhammer 40k isn't fascist, so I'm a little obliged to get into it here, but I won't go nearly as deep. But on screen now are the 5 main points in the doctrine of fascism. Those are
the creation of a new man for a new century or historical period, a single-party rule, power of the state, uniformity, nothing outside the state. Yeah, that sounds a lot like the fucking Imperium. A new man, literally just, and you can say Gilman, you can say fucking the Emperor being enthroned for a new century, not just a century. If you want to say just a century, again, etymological fallacy, that would be the entirety of the 41st millennium. New century, new fucking shit after the Age of Strife. Single party rule. Wow, it's almost like the ecclesiarchy / Inquisition is the only ruling thing that is there. And anything that goes outside of that is halted as heresy. power of the states. Yeah, the ecclesiarchy and High Lords of Terra have complete control over the entirety of the Imperium. Well, now Gilliman does, because he's the Lord Regent. Uniformity. Uniformity does not just mean in one planet. I guarantee that he's going to mention that. He's going to mention, well, actually, technically, it doesn't just, it kind of fits all of these, but, like, also doesn't fit all of these. And mention that uniformity, like, actually, well, they're on multiple planets and they're not uniform. That is not what that means. Uniformity means singular belief in their ideology and so on. They are uniform in how they operate, right? Because Nazi Germany had many different occupied places. They all looked different, but guess what? They were still all considered Nazi Germany because they were taken over by Nazi Germany and were also following the ideals of Adolf Hitler and later after him, the people that took over after him. So yes, since they all believe in the emperor and, the ecclesiarchy and fucking Inquisition, all that counts as uniformity. The state is God. If he's going to mention, well, there's worlds outside of Terra, that must mean that it's not, it's not like in a single state. That is not what that means. A state literally means a institution on a large scale takes up a state. That's like saying that the United States is a state of whatever you want to say. Because, yeah, it is a state of doing something.
Paraphrasing, but you can go read it yourself to check if I'm being accurate. But basically, it's the creation of a new man for a new era. A single-party rule by only one political authority with totalitarian control over everything. No diversity is allowed, and the state is the mystical supersoul of the people. But one point many forget is the relentless march of history towards the future where humanity reaches ever greater heights. Which means
he constantly backpedals on this. Is he saying that it does happen, that it's always a constant march towards better future, or that it doesn't happen? He has said both things by now.
that fascism is progressive. Yes, you heard that right. Again, I need to make this clear. Progressive in political theory means the belief that history never stands still or never moves backwards. And
no, the idea of fascism is not that. You can literally look up the definition of fascism and how literally the very concept of singular culture is the antithetical idea of progressivism. The idea of fascism, especially in modern terms, is the idea of having a singular state that is of one thing that does not change. It is a conservative idea of staying the same. Yes, you can expand outwards, you can gain new territory, you can even advance technologically, or so on and so forth. That is still fascist, because whether you stay stagnant or you move technologically forward, because guess what? The Imperium is also constantly technologically moving forward, because the Mechanicus Mechanicum are constantly unveiling new ancient technologies to consecrate and make new shit out of.
always looks to the future. It can be a right-wing thing or a left-wing thing. Californian types don't have a monopoly on the term. I remember my feminist left-wing professor back in the UK telling me with no uncertain terms, fascism is progressive, when I was doing my master's, and she was herself a progressive. So I'm not making this stuff up for political ideology.
It's almost as if the idea of progressivism isn't inherently one way or another. That is not hypocrisy to say that you can be a feminist and be progressive, and be a fascist and be progressive. There are multiple flavors of fascism. You know, eco-fascism, going back to the Stone Age. Nationalistic fascism of keeping the current state. Or progressive fascism of where you are keeping I don't know, let's say fucking ethnic pure state, but still technologically moving forward. But then you can be a feminist who fucking believes in wanting to get better rights.
Logical purposes. This is a typical.
I love how this guy is talking about how he was in Europe, and from the sounds of it, does not sound like he was from the U.S., but he sure as hell loves talking about the U.S. and how it's fallen.
Position to take in academia. My point is the true nature of fascism clearly does not apply to the 40k Imperium.
Yes, it does.
Anti-progress and is extremely diverse in culture and government types, which is
they are not. I thought they were not inclusive of culture, based on what you had said beforehand. Also, they are inclusive of a bunch of different cultures that are human. If you really want to get into it, technically the word would be neo-fascism, not traditional fascism, because they accept multiple cultures as long as it's humanist. Need I mind you that one of the biggest things is that they purged the mutant, the xeno, and the heretic? That's not very inclusive, because guess what? They don't like any aliens unless they're human. They don't like any humans that are mutants unless they are normal humans.
Is not tolerated in fascism. However, there's a very good argument to be made for the Imperium of Man being fascistic in the 30k era, when the Emperor was still around, since 5 principles are arguably somewhat fulfilled on some level, and has a lot of the same philosophical ideas of using the state to make a new
Why is he using so much fucking AI shit? Did he make this, or did he just find this stock footage? Why do that whenever there's so much fucking stock footage of, like, Terra and Hive cities?
Like your man, and the state being the manifestation of a collective humanity, and to serve the state is to serve humanity, as the state molds the people, while the people don't really...
Also, I think he might be Ecuadorian, because he did mention somewhere among these jokes of New Ecuador.
Mold the state, etc. So yeah, it's almost fascistic, except for one thing. Fascism is mystical and anti-materialist in its philosophy, believing the state to be the spirit of the people, while the whole point of the Imperium was to be a materialist project that abhorred any mystical ideas. The lore does...
Except right now in 40k, where it's literally built upon rhetoric and belief in the Emperor.
Glorify the Emperor and his vision by making him an avatar of the Enlightenment in a way. He's inspired by the enlightened despot, which is a real thing in history. But he's worse because they were for religious freedom, which the Emperor was not. In the end, the 30k Imperium is also a mix of a bunch of historical stuff in one giant amalgamation to comment on human history. Only it's more totalitarian and centralized than the 40k era, which is more decentralized. Again, we should not see the entirety of human political history only through 2 decades of the 20th century. I feel obliged to repeat myself constantly in an attempt to maintain clarity in such controversial topics. Upon reflecting on the political and historical commentary of this franchise, I concluded that the whole point of Warhammer is to be satire of science fiction, more than anything else. Because when you look at a lot of sci-fi, most fiction...
So, that means that trans people are bad, and female custodies and Wokehammer is suddenly bad? I mean, as long as they keep the parody of sci-fi in there, it still counts. It doesn't matter if they add modern politics or whatever the fuck you want to call it in there.
Fictional worlds are actually quite dystopian when you look under the surface. Some are even insanely grimdark by accident, but few in the audience notice just how dystopian it is, even if they're aware of some of it. The robot stories of Isaac Asimov are about how human science results in the creation of an artificial but sentient slave caste that needs to be constantly controlled through constant lobotomy and executions of deviants. In Arthur C. Clarke's...
That's not... If you have any media literacy, yeah, that's a big theme in Isaac Asimov's shit.
2001: A Space Odyssey, humanity was uplifted by a mysterious alien intelligence that plans to destroy it in the future. And even children's stories are insanely grimdark, like Ender's Game, where humanity brainwashes child soldiers to...
Yeah. Yes, you say that like this is supposed to be a surprise. If you have media literacy, big surprise. I don't know if that's a fucking buzzword for you to say, but yeah, these people are... These things are grimdark. They are bad. They suck. Their futures are dystopic. That's the point of them. That's a major theme of them. Them being children's book or not being blatant on the surface does not mean that they are inherently not that and are that by accident.
To commit genocide. It's the original Zeely sequence, and that fictional universe is 10 times worse than Warhammer 40k. And even highly progressive utopian visions meant to be portrayed as an absolute jolly time for humanity is actually just as dystopian as anything else, and made worse by its unbearable hypocrisy. Like the novel and film called Things to Come by H.G. Wells, where a technocratic scientific society takes over the world, undoing silly old traditions, and brings an unceasing, unprecedented era of progress, where humanity will conquer the stars. There's only one problem. In the end, it's just another highly doctrinal society, complete with an equivalent priest class, where people walk around in fancy robes, and the leadership of this...
It's almost like the concept of technological innovation or progress is not a bad thing. It's how you apply said progress that makes it bad. Wow, unfettered fucking progress that doesn't have humanity behind it is bad. That's crazy, dude.
Society is actually a hereditary monarchy run by a family called, and I shit you not, Cabal. Cabal is their family name. Just why? You know what they say, one man's paradise is another man's retarded power fantasy with zero self-awareness?
Yeah, and all this guy's fucking shit went out right out the window. Because if he had any sort of, like, credence whatsoever, calling something the R word, oh, but you're policing my fucking words, freedom of speech. If somebody tells you not to say something because you're going to be an asshole for saying it, that just makes you more of an asshole for ignoring them and then saying it. I don't care if it's slang where you come from or whatever. There are plenty of people that have probably told you not to say it, but then you say, well, I'm not woke, and I get to say whatever I want. But you just end up becoming a fucking moron that says shit to try and be edgy or whatever, or to try and be as insulting as possible because you know that it's a bad word to say and you just want to be mean.
This is why jocks beating up nerds in school is actually a national service. And I say that as a nerd. Maybe if I'd been bullied more, I'd be able to have...
Yeah, I think if you were bullied more, you'd actually end up garnering more sympathy for others, instead of automatically assuming that the West has fallen and becoming a fucking, I don't know, name an image board that ends with Chan or some shit, that you end up sounding like one of those fucking chuds. Yeah, you should be bullied. You deserve to be more bullied because not only did you turn out bad, that's part of a joke, more or less, that you should have been bullied as a kid, more or less that you should have probably had more structure in your life to help, or maybe if society was better, you could have had more people to reach out to instead of just assuming negativity and falling down, the right pipeline or whatever. But also you deserve to be bullied now because you have the most batshit bullshit fucking like opinions ever on a franchise, and then trying to be this fucking almost neoconservative that's like actually conservatism is based or whatever the fuck.
Have a relationship that lasts more than a few years. Anyway, it's disconcerting how most science fiction stories depict disturbing futures for humanity, and a lot of the times those issues are a natural result of trying to interpret human society through merely a scientific and technological perspective. But it leads to an AI creating a rogue black ops organization that controls everyone in the...
Again, wow, it's almost as if the idea of unfettered technological development without human empathy behind it is a bad thing.
The shadows while they think they live in a progressive paradise, which is literally what happened in Star Trek, by the way. The United Federation Democracy is a lie. Space CIA runs the show.
Yeah, that did happen, and then they moved past it because they gained empathy.
DK was making fun of this by...
It's also the fact that, people seem to forget that Star Trek went through Mad Max. I'm not even a fan of Star Trek, and I know this. They went through Mad Max and then went through the Dark Age of AI and then came out on top and then did better.
Making the modernist, rationalist imperium of man just collapse into a never-ending Middle Ages. It's...
yes, rational imperium of man. Despite the fact he literally talked about how they are nothing but rhetoric beforehand, which is the antithetical word of... Never mind.
It's actually really deep, bro. And in the end, the Imperium is run by the Inquisition, since it has no oversight or restrictions on its power. Just like Section 31 in Star Trek. These two models of galactic civilization have more in common than you'd think, so it all comes full circle, and it's interesting. I might get into it in another
Again, it's another idea of how it's applied.
Some fans think that 40K is a satire on religion and traditionalism because of all the religious lunatics in the setting, but I think they're wrong. Or if that was the intended satire, it failed spectacularly. The religious lunacy is only a thing 40,000 years in the future, precisely because progressivism and the Enlightenment failed so monumentally. So let's reiterate.
Not him about to say that actually they portrayed them as based because they were super Catholic coded or whatever. Oh my god.
Reiterate everything that happens in the lore one more time. A technologically obsessed, scientifically oriented progressive humanity created a technology it couldn't control in artificial intelligence.
We didn't know
which
why
almost
that
destroyed
happened.
it. Rationalist atheist humanism wasn't enough to satisfy and guide human civilization who needed to return to religion. The progressive Tao who challenged the Imperium are slowly starting to become more like the Imperium the more they interact with the hostile and paranormal forces of the universe. And the free-loving, sexually open society of the Eldar literally summoned a demon that destroyed their galactic civilization. And
Yes, free open. That very much embodies the Eldar. What?
they are on their way to extinction. You can't have a satire of tradition placed in humanity's future, because that only occurs if progress failed first, thus ruining the satire. You need to place it.
Or maybe you have a nuanced story that is more than just the sum of its parts and has things like context and subcontext and symbolism and other things like that. Because guess what? Even now, in the grim, dark 41st and 42nd millennium, where the ecclesiarchy rule everything, as you just said, results in untold numbers of death and zealotry and xenophobia, and everyone that follows down that line ends up destroying themselves.
In the past.
Wow, the Necrons started worshipping something and then took it over? Look what happened to them. Now they're robots with engrams of personality souls on them. Oh, the Imperium fell and then started deifying the Emperor? What's happening now? Oh yeah. Not only is there the greatest fucking schism ever in the Imperium because of the Horus Heresy and other things, and also an untold amount of xenophobia and also zealotry that is constantly putting people in danger and killing dozens of people instead of protecting them. Also, there is the thing that is not their fault at all, causing the Great Rift to happen, and then the Indomitus Crusade.
Like Mark Twain's A Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court. That's the real satire of tradition. And it's boring, and no one reads it anymore except my really pretentious friends. 40K exaggerates every aspect of humanity and civilization to ridiculous proportions, from militant atheism to religious fundamentalism. And it does so by making fun of the effects of science and technology. Because science and tech increases human power but not human wisdom. So 40K envisions how tech enlarges every silly aspect of human civilization, not.
I thought you just said that it wasn't about religion, but then you said it was about religion, but not actually, but also, yeah. But only in the way that I think it is. That's kind of what you said. Also, yeah, technology doesn't come with wisdom, but usually you gain wisdom because you had to go through so much shit to fucking make it in the first place.
Not solving the problems, just making them bigger. That's why humanity is forced to stop developing technologically in the first place to avoid self-destruction. Which it has a point. Think about it. Has all our technology really solved hunger, disease, war, death? Or just made them into existential threats? For the entire...
He's not going to like what I have to say about why that happened. Maybe it's because we have technocrats everywhere and billionaires that only want technological innovation to help line their pockets more and more and more effectively and to have people buy more shit, while also there's also the secondary thing of, transportation and so on. You're saying that technology is bad because, our modern issues aren't solved with technology, despite, the underlying issue of who the fuck controls the technology?
Entire species. Now we can make unstoppable bioweapons and war can glass the entire planet. Yeah, some diseases like cholera were wiped out, but there's new ones. And although Fritz Haber saved us all...
Oh, and let's not talk about the fact that the people that were actually like progressive in nature that created new inventions and didn't put patents on them, ended up saving millions and millions of lives. Fucking penicillin and the stuff for like insulin and other things.
All from famine by synthesizing ammonia, climate change,
You hear it, coming from the next room, or over your baby monitor.
Is a serious threat to the global food supply and might bring famine back in a big way. Like in Brazil, that insane flooding in the south ruined rice crops, which will increase the risk of starvation. Not to mention...
Yeah, it's almost like that's because we have unfettered technological development that doesn't have anything in place to prevent things like overexposure of CO2 into the atmosphere. Oh wait, except we do have new technology to fix that, but people keep lobbying against it because it won't make them enough money. Why don't solar panels exist in more places? Oh, let's see. Literally one of the things that had come out recently from a state that said, oh yes, we can actually do solar panels, but it's not monetarily profitable in the long term. Oh, fuck free energy and good energy and so on. We'll just say that it's bad, but in reality, we just can't make more money off of it except for one-time thing. Unless we produce it to fail and make people pay more and more for it over time.
Both male and female fertility are declining at an alarming rate, with the diminishing health of sperm and ovaries, for reasons we don't understand. At this rate, it's only a matter of time before we...
For reasons we don't understand, except the fact we do know why. It's things like microplastics and other, like, contaminants in our foods that aren't being overseen because of things not having good regulations and so on. Also, very funny that he puts both a man and a woman back to back and saying that we aren't fertile anymore.
Mess with something you won't be able to handle, which is why the science-loving emperor of mankind who praises the gaining of knowledge is a liar who limited human knowledge of the nature of the warp, precisely because limits have to be placed on this thing. So basing your civilization on the unrestrained progressive pursuit of knowledge just makes you a silly Billy in this universe.
Except that he's completely ignoring the entirety of the emperor's plan of why he restricted all this other shit, and almost as if the emperor is actually a hypocrite. He is not. He's not a good guy. He is evil. He is downright fucking evil from the very beginning, from the Age of Strife up until the Horus Heresy. He knew what was going to happen. He planned for it to happen all along. And allowed it to happen. Because he knew that it would ascend him to godhood. He literally planned the idea of the Mechanicus cult on Mars millennia prior.
Okay, also shows the flaws of the progressive assumption by showing how technological progress can make humanity move backwards in terms of social progress, by making knights in armor feasible again as a military asset, which...
No, because that also ignores the fact that most of the very high-tech shit that the Imperium uses was actually just low-tech shit for the Dark Age of, humanity. Insert Terminator armor was originally designed for mining equipment, but is now one of the most deadly things ever. This guy's taking a lot of leaps in logics, as if we're not also wearing body armor now. We're not going into fucking battles naked. We're just going into new and improved suits of armor.
Makes modern universal suffrage and democracy unworkable. There's a reason why it only happened in our world with the advent of the musket, which is why the Techno Knights of the Space Marines are the most...
Wow, it's almost like then whenever we started developing muskets, it started putting armor to shame, so we invented better, more mobile armor. Oh, and guess what? We still have big giant suits of armor because some weapons are too fucking strong, and we need to have more protection on us. Insert fucking bomb suits.
Visible part of the franchise. They're a symbol of technologically reviving historical relics and how technological progress can cause apparent social regression. Because although social progress is possible to a degree via a lot of effort and sacrifice, you're limited by your historical conditions. It's for insights like
this. No, you're not. You're literally not. There have been so many places throughout history that it does not matter where you come from that you can still overcome that. I could mention China, but that people would get mad at that. I could mention Russia, and people would get mad at that. But I could mention America, and people would love that because, yeah, America overcame all the shit that happened with them. Oh, and also fucking Mexico did too. There's tons of places that were able to overcome the grief of where they started.
In the setting of 40K, that people feel in a prime level that makes us enjoy it, despite most not wanting to live in this fucked up setting, and despite it being a rather unflattering depiction of humanity as a whole.
If you love it because of its being traditional and based, you are a fucking moron that ignores all of the grim, dark shit that is actually happening there. Because you think that by being there, by looking from an outside perspective, you think it would be good for you, despite the fact that most likely you would end up not as a servitor in the Imperium, or not even as a Kriegsman or a guardsman or whatever. You're not even going to be a fucking sweep in an ultramarine dreadnought or battle barge that is constantly cleaning for the service of your betters. You are going to be a person that is in the deepest fucking sectors of a hive city that have ash-thrown gray skin and have so little fertility that you probably can't even get it up. And then you're also going to be being fed fucking cornstarch.
Because the Imperium of Man faces the darkness of the universe head on, and we see the heroism necessary to do so, which is cool.
It is not heroic. It is not... It is fun and entertaining to watch because it is cool to see big men scream and fire big guns and fight aliens. But the deep lore is to also say that this is also not cool at all. This is fucking ass. You should be lucky that you're only viewing it for entertainment.
It's more appealing than nerds walking around in color-coded pajamas rambling about shield percentages and eating poop scientifically magicked into food. I like...
Wow. Recycling. Okay. Okay. So now what? You're going to be a little mad that you piss into a bottle and then you filter it through and then you have more drinkable water? Are you going to be like upset that you, I don't know, you fucking take a bath and, oh, well, guys, now I'm sitting in dead skin. Are you going to be upset that there's fucking microbes on your face constantly shitting and there's a specific species on your eyelashes? Or what? Yes, it comes from someplace. Where else is it going to come from? The void of fucking space? I would rather walk around in pajamas talking about space shield percentages than be a Kriegsman in the trenches and never know my family ever.
Star Trek, by the way. And I watch it often. But I also enjoy making fun of it. The Klingons are the good guys, by the way. Anyway.
Based.
If there's any point to 40k beyond pew 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 toy soldiers, then it's a contemplation on how bad things can get, especially after the failure of lofty utopian ideals, which is interesting.
I don't think that it's a failure of lofty ideals either. I genuinely just think that it is a failure of just kind of humanity being unfettered.
Because the two most similar countries to the Imperium of Man that exist in the world today are Russia and China, both of which are failed projects of progressive movements that promise to explore new and improved horizons for human society. Current China is especially because it was founded by a progressive militant atheist who persecuted religion and did his best to wipe it out, only for him to be deified and worshipped.
He was not deified in that way. Also, not to get into Mao, but, yeah, cult of personality was kind of his shtick. It helped him go a long way. Was it a good thing in the long run? No, he even talked about it in a lot of his books that he probably shouldn't have done that. You know, the whole idea of the Red Vanguard and so on was not the best of ideas, but from where it got China out of, it was probably the best thing that could have happened. But again, people will be kind of shocked that things can't be utopian good to turn out that way. And also, modern Russia is an oligarch, a hyper-capitalist oligarchy. Modern China is a form of neo-communism, but also has, well, it is literally mentioned or literally branded as socialism with Chinese characteristics, meaning they'll allow McDonald's in their fucking country, but as long as they're below a profit, which, again, McDonald's makes so much money in China that they will allow them not making more money than they could be because of how much money they're actually making. And if anything, I would actually probably say that it was inspired by ancient England. And in terms of modern countries, probably Russia, but there's not many countries. I wouldn't even say fucking America, because of the shit that's going on with America doesn't really line up with 40K's Imperium. So neither of those are right.
Check out the fiasco that was Mao's Mongol cult, or this massive golden statue of him built on a literal golden throne. You just can't make this shit up.
Let's not pay attention to Mount Rushmore, or all the statues of kings and queens in England, or the literal history of deification of gods and God's will and so on. I mean, this is just a statue. Like, what happened here is probably 1,000 times better than what happened in Europe with the kings and queens being deified.
It was removed
because
too much even for the Chinese government. But that doesn't stop the increasing amount of temples growing in the countryside that worship Mao as a god. And
they do not worship him as a god. If you're probably getting your shit from probably like fucking Radio Free Asia or some dumb shit that it tries to demonize China. They like Mao because they enjoyed what happened with Mao. They want what happened with Mao to happen again, because most of the people in the peasantry were taken away from their feudal landlords. Because guess what? The whole kill landlords thing was not just a meme. It was because most of the people in China were actually under basically rural warlords at that time.
And it's not just uneducated country folk, but also generals and officials, leftist scholars. It was starting to...
Yeah, I would probably imagine that you would want to kind of do what the leader that you kind of really want to redo that.
To seriously freak out even the communist government, who was telling people to calm down on the zealotry. Or they were in 2015. Things may have changed since then. I've seen reports of the government low-key encouraging Mao worship now. North Korea is of course an example of a regime that totally embraces this deification, but this is just one aspect. When you look at China with its cheapness of human life, the terrible working conditions, with high death rates, the censorship, and the countless...
Guys, let's not mention the fact that China has literally one of the best life expectancies in terms of... Fuck, what was it? Okay. I do not want to keep going on with this video and end up talking about how this is just a bunch of fucking propaganda about how bad China is. China's not perfect by any means of definition, any means of the word at all, right? But 90% of the stereotypical sweatshop China shit is usually not embraced by the Chinese government. It is usually because of foreign country corporations coming to China for cheap labor, but also relatively cheap labor compared to, and also let's not talk about how in China the houses are a lot cheaper to buy, or I don't know, literally the trains. Yeah, trains are a big deal. It's almost like transportation's a big deal in connectivity. Or let's not also talk about how good the fucking market is over there in terms of economy, and how there's a good chance that so far how it's looking that the Chinese yuan could actually outpace the fucking dollar.
Souls of industrial workers forced to feed the machine of a highly bureaucratic and inefficient empire, as well as the unbearable polluted air and the smog-covered sky, etc.
Yes, the smog-covered sky. One, let's not mention about the smog-covered sky of San Francisco or parts of America or parts of Europe or parts of the West. Mind you, how literally everything this guy has said so far in this video has never critiqued once the West, but has always pointed to the East and said that, look, that's bad, right? And then just spouts off a bunch of rhetoric.
They're just LARPing in England. So much for the workers.
I do not think that China is perfect. I do not really overly enjoy China. I think it could be a lot better than it is. But in terms of almost every country on Earth, they are probably doing the best out of compared to anyone else. Anyone else.
Paradise. The Foxconn suicide nets, by the way, in China are literally the most 40K shit you can ever see. China...
No, it's not. The most 40K shit you would probably see that's from China is probably I don't know. It'd probably be the parts of the city where like it looks like it's at ground level, but then you go and you like look over the edge and it goes down for like half a kilometer.
Is the closest thing to the Imperium of Man in the real world, which is
No, it's
ironic,
not.
considering the Tau faction are obviously Chinese coded.
No, they're not.
They're more like Space Singapore, I'd say. The Russians have a similar thing going on, where they were once a lofty, expansionist, progressive.
The Tau were probably influenced by a lot of different cultures, and probably East Asian cultures because of the meme of mecha and everything like that in anime. But that's probably because there was no other place. We had orcs that were Cockney, and a lot of the other places were Western. And it's kind of an unfortunate subtext that's there that can be interpreted, but isn't actually purposeful, and only people like him will say that they're actually Chinese.
Atheist empire operating under a materialist doctrine, but there was a collapse of the central authority, and now their declining empire is sending countless people, including convicted criminals, off to die for the empire, even using obsolete and decrepit
Why did they fall again? Why did the USSR fall? Question, why did the USSR fall? Oh, yeah. Cold War was going on. Gorbachev and everything with him. Oh, and let's not mention that the actual reason why Russia is failing was because of the shock, the system shock that they did by implementing capitalism overnight and literally crushing the entire economy overnight. And suddenly people were out of homes and people were putting onto the streets that caused people to start relying on the mafia and mobs and other things like that. Let's also not mention the fact that in terms of like progressiveness, that under Lenin and so on were probably one of the best places on earth at the time. Do not fucking dare get mad at me because I'm saying at the time, because if you look contemporary to, there was still Jim Crow segregation, and we were just coming out the fucking Civil War. We were not even 50 years past the Civil War. I don't fucking know. Let's look at England. Oh, the England was shit out of fucking luck. Straight in the Victorian era, right? Like, yeah, I would imagine that overturning a Stardom and everything of Red October and, you know, having and everyone suddenly having a life expectancy boost would have been a good thing.
Military equipment from a bygone era, with the nukes, missiles, and submarines now being blessed by priests of the now official state church. Some of these pictures...
Now that's pretty 40K. But that's because they're Orthodox. They are very, very, very Orthodox and religious.
These are the most 40K images you'll ever see of real life. And they just don't end. There's countless pictures of this. It's gotten so bad that the Orthodox Church had to issue an order for priests to stop blessing weapons of mass destruction. I feel bad for my Orthodox brothers, actually, because corrupt government forces are trying to co-opt their beautiful spirituality for things that aren't very Christian. So please don't think I'm criticizing the Orthodox Church here. I'm not. I'm trying to point out...
I would imagine that you wouldn't want to, you know, demonize the church, seeing as how you're like a Templar, so...
Current state of the Russian government, which still venerates the Soviet atheist leaders like Lenin and Stalin.
No, it doesn't. No, it does not. If you know anything about Russian like education, they actively talk about how bad communism was. They are the most staunch anti-communist on the face of the
initiated brutal persecution of religion in Russia. This weird syncretism with atheist militants, progressives, and traditional religion gives the whole place a 40K feel to it. The anti-progressive view of human history within 40K is absolutely crucial to its appeal across the board regardless of one's politics. Extremists from both the left and the right tend to love it even when the lore portrays both sets of values as misguided. But it's still appealing to everyone because 40K is about raging against the dark and that defiant and noble spirit that stands firm to the very end. It's also a a cathartic way to express the decline of civilization and the changing of an era, which everyone is feeling right now, especially since 2020, regardless if they admit it or not. But I think its main appeal is how refreshing it is as a major franchise with a different perspective inherent to the setting that is distinct from the typical triumphalism of the current year. For now, anyway. The ESG money ruins everything. The danger of forcing a specific kind of progressive ideology to dictate every major piece of culture risks turning everything into this one blob where everything looks the same. Do we really need 40K to be yet another Marvel or Star Wars? If you make Warhammer lose its edge and mired by current year politics in a way that makes the characters and entire factions behave in a way that really doesn't make sense for the logic of the setting, then it won't be the thing that made it so popular in the first place, now would it? I myself am a Star Wars refugee. I was really into the Star Wars Expanded Universe back in college until it became a crappier, less well-written version of Marvel after Disney. And I know there's tons like me. The growing success of 40 40K over the years is directly correlated to Disney's mishandling of Star Wars, which was never a grim, dark reflection of human civilization, but it wasn't a mere product of entertainment either. It was King Arthur in space, with all the legacy that entails. 40K, as it is now, unwittingly captured a similar feeling of the eternal story like Star Wars did by portraying civilization as an ever-repeating cycle, just like Dune before it. By portraying medievalism in space, it becomes an Arthurian story by default, and it does so by questioning the 4 assumptions of a progressive view of history. Here are the false assumptions. 1. The universe is inherently stable enough to guarantee progress forever. This is more the left-wing assumption of a necessarily benign universe, where the arc of history all but guarantees it, and we're typically progressing to a utopia of some kind. We're naturally evolving and nature is guiding the way. However, in truth, evolution doesn't lead to guaranteed development, but adaptation, which is not the same. You can increase in intelligence or lose intelligence or stagnate depending on the conditions. Like the Wall-E people, comfortable conditions cause decline. Also, entropy is inevitable, which will cause collapse that sets progress back, which leads to the second assumption, that the chaos of entropy and conflict are what guarantees progress, evolution through the eternal struggle to life. This is more the right-wing view, war as the great purifier, but in truth, too much chaos destroys everything, and it's more than likely that you'll eventually be destroyed by something bigger in this scenario, eventually, until entropy consumes everything in the heat death of the universe, making your development and struggles pointless, ultimately. Third assumption, tradition is the enemy of progress. Untrue. Progress doesn't come from dismantling the past and resetting everything. That just makes you reinvent the wheel like an idiot. Or reinvent slavery, like what the Soviets did with labor camps, as opposed to moving beyond slavery, like the British British monarchy did. True progress comes from building on the foundation that came before. Tradition just means the transfer of customs and ideas through the generations. Progressivism itself is a tradition of thought. If your tradition is to question and dismantle tradition, you won't progress, you'll destroy yourself in cognitive dissonance when your descendants obey the spirit of that idea by dismantling what came before, which means dismantling the idea of progress, which is what happened with postmodernism. Fourth assumption, embrace change. Newer is always better.
Alright, everybody knows that if you conceal carry, the most important thing to be able to do with your gun is act.
Silly, of course. Not all change is good. You need to differentiate between what is progress and what is degeneration. Traditional knowledge becomes a great way to do that.
Hours.
Because if a tradition was effective enough to last this long, it must know a thing or two about avoiding ideas or habits that would cause it to degenerate and die off. Progress through tradition. We progress by trying to live up to the eternal ideals instead of changing ideals because of dumb young people in universities who think they know better. The Warhammer 40k universe is a...
Wow, that is literally the most trad is better I've ever fucking heard. Shocker, maybe the shit that older people were saying was wrong and they just kept parrying it because it was people that were in power that were saying it. They got there because they kept killing people to get there. Wow. Maybe the newer generation has an insight that older people might not have, and that's that they don't have rose-tinted glasses, or they can actually look instead of being tunnel-visioned on something. But of course, college is making people woke. They're ruining our modern generation, says the Templar guy.
Franchise that explores these four assumptions in the lore, and the story elements are narrative ways to express anguish at our own grimdark universe. In 40k, the warp will eventually engulf everything and destroy whole life.
No, it won't, unless we work together, because every time that we've worked together, the Imperium worked together with people, the warp nearly gets fucking closed off for good.
A given. This is akin to the aforementioned heat death of the universe. But there is hope in 40k in the form of faith. The Emperor's faith in a vision he saw for humanity, and the faith that the Emperor will return. Or the Eldari with their faith in one of their gods. It's the faith in divine intervention, basically. A transcendent power that defends the existence...
Oh, so faith in the fact that something will happen if you do nothing, and you have to, like, being stagnant yourself, something good might happen anyway. Yeah, that sounds pretty much like conservatism and how it is anyway. Thinking that they are owed something because of simple existence instead of working for it and, fighting to make it so because of the past.
Whether or not this faith is well-founded, 40k doesn't answer that. But it does answer that this faith is absolutely...
Oh, it does answer that. It says that it's fucking stupid.
Necessary to fuel civilization in a bleak universe. Now, it's important to note that progress does exist, but it's only one part of the cycle that happens before decline. Progress only occurs via great sacrifice, and it can be easily lost without proper vigilance. History moves forwards and also moves backwards, which is why the progressive types are only partly correct. However, I believe that history also moves upwards, while it moves forward and backwards, essentially being a three-dimensional spiral, motherfucker. I'm not on drugs, I swear. My point is, as the cycle of history keeps going through the eras, it does tend to progress higher than previous eras, but they also tend to collapse more catastrophically as well. And the same story of empires rising and falling seems to be told over and over, again and again, in a larger scale, but with the same archetypes repeating themselves over and over. Here's the grand narrative of civilization. The people used to live in the good times, in a golden age. Then things get bad as a tyrant takes over and oppresses the people in poverty and deprivation. Then comes a great leader that founds a new era. Then the people in this new golden era sin against the heavenly order, and they fall under the sway of a mad tyrant again and are back into poverty and oppression until a new great leader comes along.
Except that that's usually not fucking what happens. Look at this AI generated shit. Literally just Catholic guys, Catholic based. Oh my god. I'm so sorry, Catholics and Protestants and fucking anyone under Christianity. These are the people that you are associated with.
Sets them free, and the cycle goes on and on. You see this cycle in several mythologies and religious narratives, and in the Bible, but especially in the book of Judges. And this is the grand narrative that repeats itself over and over in Warhammer lore, with Guilliman being the latest iteration of the great leader coming to the rescue for his people. This is also the story of the Book of Revelations, where the cycle is believed to play out for the very last time before the final end of history. It's the cycle of civilization, and it first played out with just a few cities in the Middle East, with Sargon of Akkad and whatnot, to now involving the entire planet. Having this cycle continue out into space on a galactic scale seems only natural, which is why the space opera genre seems so reactionary, with empires and monarchs and mystics being an internal aspect to civilization that just repeats itself over and over again. And this started with
typically that's not because it's saying that it's good or anything like that. It's typically because it's talking about how if you blow it up to such an extent, and it really puts on display how on a micro level how bad it actually is.
With Isaac Asimov in his Foundation series, which is what inspired the entire genre. And Asimov was a very creative and progressive thinker, but even he had trouble imagining a way out of the cycle. But that's a topic for another time.
He didn't have trouble imagining out of the cycle because his books weren't purely progressive thinking of everything must be good in utopia. It was nuanced. It had flaws because that was the point. He wrote that on purpose like any good writer should.
And with that, I'd like to thank you, my patrons. You're the bulwark that keeps chaos from consuming this channel into oblivion. And thank you all.
You're the thing that keeps the trans from agendaing.
For listening to my ramblings. Have a good day, my friends.
All those nights I wish you'd stayed underneath the milky dance like flick.
Okay. All right. Okay. Oh my god, I'm literally dying. Zoom on in. Jesus Christ. I don't know how you could interpret 40k lore worse or not know what you're talking about worse. Genuinely, I don't know. That was bad. That was a very bad video. I would obviously go and say, don't go witch hunt or whatever, but fuck it. I don't know. I don't know if anyone will even watch this video. This guy's stupid. This idea that traditionalism is actually the thing that keeps us at bay of chaos coming at our door is such a stupid rhetoric that only a person that wants to LARP as a Templar, as the Rantsona, would say that, especially with all the nonsense of the West has fallen on all this fucking propaganda garbage bullshit. It is literally so stupid. And then getting into Wokehammer and then saying, like, this wasn't about culture war. Yeah, I think this is just what it is. No, dude, you were just talking about culture war, but we're saying it with fanciness. Like, just because you said it does not make it true. Everything that was happening there was bullshit. That is not what 40k is about. I agree with some of the stuff that he said. You hear me in the video. I agree what he said with. Most of it was not. Do not listen to this guy. This is literally the most astounding piece of nonsense I have probably ever watched, and you can really see that all he cares about is culture war nonsense and not actually 40k, because he keeps coming around to the idea that fundamentally 40k is based because it's trad, like trad and conservative and all this other stuff, like, but it's in reality it's making fun of him. It is. It, as much as it's making fun of political ideologies, it's also making fun of him. It is making fun of everybody. It is saying that when you are unfettered and have no human empathy whatsoever, guess what happens? It is grimdark. No matter how much you want to say, like, oh, well, other stories make it worse, so clearly this isn't as bad. No, who cares if you're cross-referencing to say that these other things are bad, even whenever this thing is actually trying to say be as worse as possible, it actually ends up being good. That's... That is literally just your opinion and your twisted view that supposedly the West has fallen and the world is about to end because of trans people or whatever the fuck. That's it. That is literally it. And also Russophobia and also xenophobia with fucking fear of Asian people and Chinese people or whatever. Like, I do not know how this has won so many views and how so many people are agreeing with him. this video could go one of two ways. People will come in my comment sections yelling at me, and then I have to make another video laughing at them. Or people come and agree with me. Or he comes into my comment section and talks about how it's actually I'm an idiot and a moron, and maybe he calls me the R word and other stuff. But guess what? I'm not going to argue with him. Because I clearly believe in what I believe. He clearly believes in what he believes. We are not going to come to a compromise. Us talking will do nothing for each other. Except for maybe entertain me for a little bit. But, like, yeah, anyway, thank you to my Patreons that I don't have any. Yeah, go let me continue my addiction to Warhammer. And donate down below as low as $2.99 a month. Then there's obviously a Cash App. Like, comment, subscribe. Look, it's all glowing down there. And hit the bell if you want to be notified. Other than that, please let me know what you think down in the comments. I need to make sure that good comments aren't not going to be filled with a bunch of fucking chuds that think that 40k is based and that we should all be living in it. So yeah, go do that. Go talk. Go ramble. Let's have a conversation. Anyone that comes in insulting me or just being stupid, I'm probably just going to make fun of. So yeah, other than that, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.